For several years, my father had a good idea that his family was wasting a lot of effort to keep something secret from him. What was that secret? Well, for starters, his brothers had an olive-skinned complexion, typical of most Spaniards. My father, on the other hand, was pale with freckles. In 1949, an unfamiliar person walked up to my father while he was with his cousin Sarita at the Café Paris and asked all sorts of questions. The man seemed genuinely interested in him. The conversation lasted a short while, and then he left. My father's classmates began to talk behind his back at school, spreading rumors about his parents. But my father, an extremely sensitive and intuitive individual, knew that these kids were doing this, and the secret that his mother had kept from him for so long was becoming utterly ridiculous by now. So one sunny afternoon, when school let out as it always did, my father came straight home and decided to confront my grandmother by asking the unimaginable question, "Mom, is my dad really my dad?" Well, my grandmother did not respond at first, but when my father angrily pressed on, she finally relented, unraveling the secret that had been kept from him for so many years. Everyone else had known, his brothers, his cousins, but so did my father. He did not have to confront his mother, but maybe he did because he was growing tired of the charade and tired of the lies. What really pissed my father off was not the fact that my grandfather Antonio was not his biological father. It was the fact that they kept this truth from him in the hopes to not let this little boy suffer. They did this out of love and consideration to my father, but maybe it angered my father that his own family did not feel that he could have been trusted with the truth. His family was afraid that he would have been devastated as a result of the news, but his reaction that afternoon was about as opposite to that as one could imagine. When you think of the upbringing that my grandfather Antonio provided for my father, perhaps the kindest human being that one could ever meet, it makes sense that my father could have cared less about biology. Just another reason why Antonio was such a great man. So if Antonio was not my father's true biological father, then who was it? Well, the story goes like this. Years back and in 1940, and on that magical evening in Tangier, my grandmother had been on that balcony, and she did indeed ask Antonio for a match for her cigarette, but she had also been crying because she felt like her life was in turmoil. Most 20-year-old girls cry when they learn they are already 8 weeks pregnant. Prior to meeting my grandfather that evening, my grandmother had been married to a man by the name of Fritz Schmidt. Fritz Schmidt was a promising concert pianist from Austria who could also play the trumpet, the violin, and the saxophone. Eventually, he would also become a band leader and would tour Europe and Northern Africa. How the two met is unclear. My grandmother was a young actress, so maybe they met at a rehearsal where he was asked to play. What was clear is that Fritz loved my grandmother very much during their short marriage. Whether or not it was his intention to raise a family with Mercedes did not matter, however, because once she realized that she was pregnant with my father, she became very bitter towards the 20-year-old Schmidt and asked for a divorce almost immediately. Mercedes felt that her pregnancy had jeopardized her modeling and acting career. Whatever the reason, she now wanted out of the marriage. He had no choice but to oblige, and so there she was at the hotel all alone as per the Jewish customs. My grandfather Antonio learned of this the very first time they met at the Hotel Regina, and indicative of a truly great man, falling in love with the woman who was divorced and pregnant did not matter to him, and the rest, as they say, is history. Despondent Fritz Schmidt returned to his family in Austria, and if love was blind, then being broken-hearted was deaf and dumb as well, because he returned to Austria without knowing what the Germans had been doing. Not long after his return, Hitler's troops apprehended him, branded him with a number for being Jewish, and sent him to a concentration camp, none other than Auschwitz. Somehow he managed to survive the Holocaust, and sometimes his band would tour in Tangiers, where he would inquire about his son. In fact, the man who approached my father and cousin Sarita that day at the cafe was none other than Schmidt himself. He was probably there during a musical tour. His musical abilities could explain why my grandmother felt compelled to obtain a piano from my father to learn a short while later. And if you know my father and I, you can see that we do have an incredible ear for music. Except my father never much cared for Van Halen. What became of Fritz after 1950 is not completely clear. However, it was said that he continued his musical career until his death in 1979. His cause of death is unknown.